All right, welcome back. Let's get started with our last discussion session of our network epidemiology series. I want to thank you guys all again for participating in this. I know that it's been a lot of work and I hope that it's been fruitful and a good experience for you. Before we get into the parallel sessions, I wanted to take some time to thank the members of our organizing team. You know, when we first started thinking about this, we thought, okay, well, we can throw this together. It's not that complicated. It's all going to be online. How much more complicated is it than, scheduling like a working, a research group meeting? It turns out it's a lot more complicated than that. So I really appreciate all the effort of this organizing team. So I'd like to acknowledge them and their contributions one by one. So Juniper Lovato, who is program director of the Vermont Complex Systems Center at UVM, played an enormous role in helping to organize this, particularly the organization of working groups on Slack. Juniper's Twitter profile says that she's the Martha Stewart of science, which I love, and it's an accurate description, but really it barely scratches the surface of what Juniper can do in terms of building community of scientists. And so she has a lot of experience in this at UVM and from the Santa Fe Institute in bringing researchers together and helping spark new interactions that lead to great ideas. So thanks to Juniper for that. And I also would like to spotlight Daniel Serrano, who is a faculty specialist at the University of Maryland, and he's a research educator in our combined program. Daniel's background is that he has a PhD in biology. He has been sort of an unsung hero in so many of our events in the combined program, really playing a key role in having the ideas, the concepts, bringing it through the planning stage, and also in the implementation. I know you haven't seen him so much. He's really been behind the scenes making it all happen. And then also a special thank you to the two combined graduate fellows who were on our organizing team. Anshuman Swain, who made the lovely graphics that you've seen both on our website and in my slides. But he did a lot more than this. He really played a role on Slack, helping answer questions, guiding people who were confused to the right places, and really helping to keep the community engaged. So also Nick Monona, another graduate fellow in the combined program, he played a very similar role on Slack, just igniting the conversations. But then also he had some other insights, and he put together the background materials that were organized, that were available on Slack. I know you guys are coming from so many different backgrounds, and we were thinking about that, and Nick in particular was thinking about that, collecting resources to share with you depending on where your background, depending on what your background was. So there was always something to help get you up to speed to make the most of the material presented here. And last but not least, Glynis Smith, who is our program facilitator for the combined program. And she's really been leading most of our communications efforts. I really appreciate her organization, and that she's always reminding us that we're a little bit behind and we need to send out these announcements and we need all these materials. So thank you to Glynis, and thank you to the whole team for making this work. A couple extra shout outs to the, so a lot of people helped advertise our series on Twitter, through emails, different faculty members, but the Santa Fe Institute in particular, we got a lot of people from their mailing lists come, so thank you to them. And my slides are you not seeing my slides go forward? Do you just see one slide? Juniper, I can see you. Can you nod? Do you see this?
I just see the first.
You just see the first slide. Okay, that's what I saw. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and do this again because I'll do this. All right. Not that it was. So here was the picture of all the people that I was talking about. And then, oh, it pauses it. I am having problems. I'm going to, oh, there we go. All right. All right. So I want to thank you also to the speakers who were really great. And as I said in the main series, as an organizer, I've never had so many speakers take the particular speaking duty that they had so seriously, in the sense that they were really speaking to this audience rather than giving the latest talk they had off the shelf. And so I really appreciate it. I know there was some overlap between the different talks, and to me that was especially beneficial because the most important points we got to hear over and over again, which was really useful. All right, and thank you also to you guys. So this is the biggest thank you. So thank you to our diverse participants. And you guys are drawn from a wide range of fields of expertise, from mathematics and public health to medicine and bioinformatics and sociology, and so many different career stages. As I said at the beginning, kind of aim this at the level of graduate students, but we were delighted to have graduate students, postdocs, faculty participate along with researchers from non-academic environments, and also people coming from all over the world. I particularly appreciate it when you're coming here and it's some weird hour for you. So thank you. The participants are really what made especially this working group series so amazing. I went back yesterday through the introductions on our Slack page, and just to see people talking about why they were joining this series and what they were hoping to get out of it, it was really motivating for me. So thanks to all of you. All right, and just a few more details. We have Best Project Awards coming that we have. You know the details about this. The top 2 teams will be getting awards, and so there'll be some information on the website. So we'll have a panel of judges go through these. All your final materials will be due by the end of next week, and that's when the judging will start. So follow us on our website and on Slack for more information about these, and also about the certificate of completion. So because I'm having some weird slide sharing problem, I'll just go back to this. And all right, so that was my basic spiel for today. Next up are our parallel sessions. So as you guys know, these presentations today were optional. Everybody gave a presentation last week, and some groups wanted to go a little more in depth, right? So we designed this series so that it could be accessible to people who just wanted to start learning about network epidemiology and maybe were overcommitted with their regular research tasks. And also for those who really wanted to dive in more deeply. And that second set is the set that we'll hear from today. So they all presented last week, but they wanted to follow up and discuss and present their progress. So you can go to our website for all those Zoom links to the different sessions. So with that, I just want to thank you for your time and for helping make this a great series. And I'm going to turn it over to Juniper, who's going to add a few closing remarks of her own.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And before I get started, I think the person that we really need to thank is Michelle. She's done an amazing job and she thought of this entire workshop, so thank you so much. This has been an amazing experience, and I'm really thankful to my co-organizers and to all the speakers who were really great. From all of us at the University of Vermont and the Complex Systems Center, we've been watching as your projects have been developing, and we're just blown away with what you've been able to do in such a short amount of time. And it's just been really inspiring to see so many people from diverse backgrounds coming together and working on these projects. It's been really amazing, and it's cool to be able to see sort of this online platform work so well and sort of go beyond geographical boundaries. So that's been really interesting to see. So thank you all for participating and taking this so seriously. The last thing I wanted to mention is that some of the elements of this program were inspired and loosely based off of a face-to-face workshop that Laurent Hebert-Dufresne and I run every year in Quebec City. And this is called the Complex Networks Winter Workshop. This is a one-week face-to-face workshop in Quebec City in December. And applications for this are now open. It's a really cool workshop where you come together pretty similar to this structure, work on multidisciplinary teams on network science problems. And one of the cool things about the workshop is that all of the faculty lecturer mentors are there the entire time working with you. So it's a good opportunity to get to know some of the top researchers in network science really well. Applications are open until July 1st, and I hope that you'll apply. I'm going to post the link to the website and our Twitter in the chat. But thank you again, everybody, for just all the work that you put into these projects. It's been heartening and amazing to see all of this grow and develop over time. And I'm excited to see your updates in the parallel sessions coming up.
Thank you very much. We've really enjoyed working as a team, and we enjoyed being part of this group. And our group decided to use an agent-based model to investigate how social distancing might be used as a control method. And we are composed of following 4 people: Ben Braun from University of Kentucky, Başak Tarkas from Istanbul, Brian Beckich from the University of Vermont, and myself from the University of Vermont. Let me go. And our project was really inspired by the first talk we saw on this topic 4 weeks ago, and by Laurent. And he made 3 points that really resonated with us. One was the importance of behavior in trying to predict epidemic spread. Another was the idea that there would be that the heterogeneity in behaviors and the heterogeneity in response of maybe agents would affect the final network, the final epidemic. And the fact that agent-based models may be a good way to actually go about studying these epidemics. And so we were interested in building a toy-based model to investigate some of these questions in a very simplified framework. So the questions we asked were: how effective is social distancing in controlling the epidemic? And is there a critical threshold? And how does the critical threshold maybe depend upon how the model structure? So the model we built was an agent-based model that had the following agents. We started with individuals that were susceptible. And an individual that was susceptible, that was surrounded by individuals that were infected, had a chance of acquiring some of infections. And after it acquired some infections, it went into an infected asymptomatic state. Once it was in an asymptomatic state, if it had acquired a lot of the infection, it was actually put into the symptomatic state and subsequently removed by death. But if it had a lower level of infection, it was either remained asymptomatic and could then go on to recover and become immune, or there was a 50% chance that it became symptomatic. And once it became symptomatic, it could either be recovered with a 95% chance, or there'd be a 5% chance that it could be removed. And we decided to look at two different networks. In this presentation, we're really focusing on the small world network because we're really interested in the social interactions that take place. And it seems like social networks are better described by the small world network than the spatial network. And we performed a series of experiments. So the first series of experiments, we looked at the regularity in the small world network, which is the degree of connection between the nodes, and the effect of social distancing. The second series of experiments, we did those things, and we also looked at our assumption about assuming that there was a pathogen threshold, because we were afraid that the pathogen threshold might actually be, and maybe actually driving some of our results. And then we are also interested in this idea that there could be both top-down and bottom-up control. So social distancing is being informed by government and telling us how we can go out, what businesses are open. But there might also be bottom-up social distancing where if you see that a lot of your neighbors are actually infected, then you're more likely to social distance. So we looked at this in a spatial network because it was faster to run some of the experiments. And this is some of our results. So the first graph on the left shows the time of the epidemic versus the number removed and the number resistant. And not surprisingly, you can see that when you have a high, when you look at the social distance chance, which is shown by color going from dark blue to light blue, where the lighter the color is, the greater the social distancing chance, you find that not surprisingly, when you have a high social distancing chance, you have a very small epidemic and it doesn't last very long. But as you reduce the amount of social distancing that takes place, you can see that it begins to spread out, and you get to many cases where you see that the epidemic, everybody in the population is either infected or removed, and the epidemic takes a lot longer to play out. And what's interesting to us is that the epidemic seems to be bimodal, and there seems to be an area in the middle where we don't see many infections. So we're kind of interested in what is controlling that. And then we also looked at the social distancing chance versus the number of connections or the number of nodes that were connected in the network. And when you see that graph on the right, you can see that the regularity or the number of nodes goes from very low connection to very high at 70. And there doesn't seem to be any relationship between the number of connections you have and the actual outbreak. If I go to my next slide. This basically shows how these different components interact. So we're interested in looking at the initial outbreak size. And you can see that the initial outbreak size, this is a heat map, shows that there is no effect of the node degree, which we saw in the previous slide. There wasn't much effect of social distance chance. Time was slightly positively correlated, number of resistant and number of removed as well. We're also looking at how this pathogen fatal threshold, which is a kind of a key parameter in a model, might actually influence our results. And interestingly, that it wasn't really, if you look at the top row, the pathogen fatal threshold didn't affect the initial outbreak size, the regularity, the social distance chance, or the time. So it didn't seem like how we set that parameter had a major effect on our outcome. And finally, this is our results from looking at social distance chance versus the number removed. And you can see how many on the color tells us how many are resistant. So the brighter the color, more individuals are resistant. And as you increase the social distance chance, you can see that at very high social distancing, very few are resistant, but also very few are dead. That makes sense. But there seems to be some intermediate strategy where you're between 65 and 75%, where you're seeing that there's actually relatively few removed, but a greater proportion that are resistant. And we think this might be important because things like in New Zealand, where they're actually clamping down very closely on the epidemic, any kind of new individuals coming in with disease would likely cause a huge spike. So it may be best to be in somewhere in this middle range where you're actually damping down on the number of deaths, but having a large number of individuals that are actually resistant. And then this is our looking at both top-down and bottom-up control. So on the x-axis, we have the social distance chance, and on the y-axis, we have the social distance threshold. And what's interesting here is that this is the case where if your neighbors get sick, you begin to stay home. And what's interesting here is that as soon as you reach 2 individuals or more, that are using this social distancing threshold, there's really no effect on the behavior of the epidemic. So you can see that also on the slide on the right, where we're looking at the social distance threshold. It wasn't affected by average node degree, social distance chance, it didn't affect time. So none of these values were affected by that particular bottom-up control unless it was very severe. And so what we'd like to do is actually sort of determine whether these kind of assumptions we made in this model actually are reasonable, and what kind of other aspects of the epidemic we might be able to investigate using a very simple toy model. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. I think Ben has been answering some of the questions.
Thank you, Ben.
So thanks everyone in the group for the amazing presentation. You can stop sharing your screen right now. Can the next group, which is covidBUSTERS, raise their hand, whoever is presenting? Got you. Can you start sharing your screen? Oh. Atia, can you share your screen? Yeah, also it would be great if you could share your videos, because it makes it more interactive, and because we are recording the sessions, it would be nice to have the videos on.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, yes, we can see the screen.
Sure. So, please, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you also unmute Owen because he's going to speak as well?
Okay.
Right. So, hi guys, welcome back to our follow-up presentation of our project on effect of migration with heterogeneous prevention measures using an agent-based model. So, some time ago, India saw a nationwide lockdown, and due to that, millions of daily wage workers were left stranded. So they started moving from bigger cities to smaller cities. So that pretty much our inspiration and start. And we also want to see the effect of heterogeneity in cities and regions in terms of lockdowns and hygiene habits. And some research questions we want to ask with this project is, can we have different positioning and working hours of hubs like supermarkets as essential services be, so that the minimization of spread can be done, and to find the possibility of control migration if there is any, and the effect of heterogeneity in size of families in the spread. So, Atip, can I have next slide, please? All right. So what's new in our project is that we want to bring two aspects of a system together. The first one being is the heterogeneity in measures across cities, like in lockdown habits and hygiene habits, and the presence of central locations and their effect on the spread while migration is still going on. Atip, next slide, please. All right, so this is what pretty much sums our project. It's simple ABM, and there are agents, and there are these effective hubs like supermarkets and things like that, where people come more often. And we want to simulate the travel and the migration, and we want to see how this affects the spreading of the disease. Now, Adib, can I have next one? All right, so random movement of agents. Next one, please.
Yeah, so this is kind of how we started the model. We just started off with random walks. There's no central locations, and each movement is kind of moving, each agent is moving around randomly with some degree that they're kind of following a vector. And obviously it's an SIR model because we found that's the most descriptive of this pandemic so far. So it can be either be in a susceptible, infected, or removed state. And at every time step, there's a certain proximity in which an agent forms a network with its neighbors if a neighbor is within that proximity. And then among those neighbors, there can be infected members, and the ratio of infected members to the susceptible agent kind of informs how if they get infected, kind of like the previous presentation. Next slide, please. Atab? Oh yeah, sweet. So this is a couple early toy experiments we started playing with. Were relating to like introducing migration into this random movement network. You can kind of see how if you have multiple hubs where the infection kind of starts, it diffuses really rapidly throughout this random walk network. And this is interesting to us, but we really wanted to start examining what it looked like when we introduced these central locations into the model. Next slide, please. So, this is a kind of a summary of what it starts looking like if you introduce a lockdown into the random movement models. So you can kind of see that like if you introduce a lockdown early on, the number of infected individuals at the end is reduced drastically. But if you wait too long, it doesn't matter. And we're going to explore that a little bit later on with what Atyab's going to talk about. But the next thing we really did was move into the preferential movement model, where we defined home locations, marketplace locations, workplace locations, and like kind of public transit hubs. And we gave each agent a probability that they would visit each of these locations at every one of their time steps. So we're kind of like able in this way to create social policies, like stay-at-home policies that have been implemented all over the US and the world as well, and say, hey, if you have a particular social policy like the lower graph here, which is a higher probability that you stay at home, it shows a kind of dramatic decrease in the number of total infected agents throughout the course of the simulation. Whereas if you keep that number high or low and you allow agents to kind of go anywhere they want to, then you still get like a pretty steep infection curve. So we basically started playing around with these policies to say like, oh, maybe we'll increase the probability that an agent stays at home and kind of play around with what that looks like. And now Atyab's going to kind of go into detail about what these different lockdown types would look like.
Yeah, so thanks on for that. So what we basically wanted to do was look at different lockdown measures and then actually analyze and compare different kinds of lockdown. So for example, in this first graph, you can see this is a stay-at-home policy where the probability of the agent staying at home is around 0.9. And what you can see, what you can infer from the graph is if you start the lockdown initially, the peak at the peak of the infected individual is small, and the pressure on the healthcare system will be small as well. But if the lockdown is applied at the later stage of infection, what we say is most of the city gets infected quite easily. So this is another lockdown policy that we had in mind. If we compare the last one and this one, there's not much difference. The probability of staying at home, the difference is around 0.05. But what we see is, if we look at the T is equal to 10 stage, what we see is a 50% decrease in the peak of Imax, which is quite much. Another lockdown measure that we used to analyze, that we looked at, was restricted movement. So this is a bit more lenient. People are allowed to go to work, go to market, go to transit. But what we want to infer from all these lockdown measures is, if we are late at inflicting this lockdown, it does not matter what kind of lockdown it is, the peak is quite large, and it's bad news for us. We also looked at, so this is another graph in which the movement is allowed. People are allowed to go to work, go to market, but they also use social distancing. The way we have social distancing in our model is we decrease the radius of the infection, and we conclude that if if the agents follow perfect hygiene and social distancing, we don't really need hard restrictions. We also did take a case study of New Zealand. What we basically did was New Zealand recently announced that they have won that battle, and we also were talking about this in the last presentation. If we look at their mobility data, this is from Google Maps, and we look at their, they have this 4-level lockdown. If you look at their website, you go to the government website, you can differentiate between level 3 and level 4. And that's what we did. Earlier, what we were doing was it was a step function. on one day there is no lockdown and the other there is lockdown. But what we then did was, it was a like a ladder function. On one day it was level 3 and then on the other is level 4. And what we see is that it does work and the peak gets shortened and there is not much effect. Another thing that we have from our model is quarantining people into the quarantine centers. If you can see in this, there is a finite probability. If a person gets infected, there's a finite probability of them going from the city to a quarantine center, and once they get completely recovered, they come back to their home locations. We define a parameter called quarantine rate, which is the ratio of people who are getting in, who has been infected. They'll get tested, and if they get tested positive, there's a particular ratio of people who will be quarantined. And if we do look at the effect of this quarantine rate, if the quarantine rate is small, like 0.05 on the graph on the left, what we find is the peak is again quite large and most of the city gets infected. But if quarantine rate is 0.9, which means the people are getting tested and the quarantine is effective, then what we see is the peak is down, which actually reminds me of something that Bianconi also said in her presentation, that timely identification is really important in our case. This is again a collection of the results that we have. If my quarantine rate is 1, which means everyone gets who gets infected gets quarantined, the peak is small. But if my quarantine rate is small, that means only a small percentage of people who are getting infected are getting quarantined. The peak is again large and it puts up pressure. And yeah, so yeah, that's it. Some future plans that we are still working on and we would keep working on it is effect of heterogeneous families that I think Owen is already done. And yeah, so that's it. I think it has been a great experience, this workshop, and you guys have done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.